Hi, welcome to Workplace Stories podcast, a podcast on emotional journeys in the workplace to inspire people to live their life at the fullest, at work and beyond. I'm your host, Lison Mage, certified mindset coach. You can subscribe to this podcast to hear more about courageous stories and thought leaders. Reach out if you want to share yours. Have a great time listening. Enjoy! Hi everyone, so today we have Pat with us. She gladly shared her journey within the workplace. So please, Pat, let us know a bit more about your career and journey so far.
Hi, Lison. Thank you for having me on the show. I have worked my way up through the corporate ladder for the last 25 years. I started off in accounting, did all the right things. You know, in today's society, women are theoretically equal to men, and I was given some really, really great opportunities. And I managed through hard work, through going and doing my master's degree as well, my MBA, to climb that corporate ladder. And I ended up with a very, very successful career. Today, however, I no longer am in that corporate world and I run my own business. And I have to say I am the happiest I have ever been.
Mm-hmm. And how come you did some change from corporate to running your own business?
Well, look, to be honest with you, because of family issues, I stayed in corporate for a long time. And to be frank, I think I lacked the confidence to start my own business as well. I think a lot of women suffer from that. So it kept me stuck in that space. I had always wanted to run my own business, and it eventually got to the point where I was able to, where it was just so hard to stay in the work environment that I was in. And we'll talk about that. And that really made me create, you know, when you are in more pain where you're at than what it takes to change, that's when that change happens. And for me, I found the workplace, certainly corporate, quite soul destroying as well. It didn't gel with my values, and I just didn't like the way people treated each other as well. Having said that, there are some companies that are wonderful. They have a great set of values. But certainly in my experience working for companies and as a consultant, there are not many.
And you mentioned something about the pain, and definitely, you know, human brain can go through pain, but there is as well like some limit. And that's something I really like to talk about it. I'm sure we will discuss it a bit later as well. Or in fact, why not start now? What was the most challenging moment for you in the workplace?
Look, the most challenging moment in the workplace was essentially being bullied, really being bullied by my boss. It was utterly soul destroying. And particularly if you already, at that point, I didn't have the best self-esteem in the world. You know, I'd suffered from bulimia for many years, and I had a boss who literally bullied me every day. He would put me down. He would belittle my work. He would find fault with everything that I did. He would say things to me like, "Oh, I just don't know what's wrong with you." And I literally never heard a positive word from him.
Could you describe a few examples on how you felt bullied in a work situation?
Well, there were a few different things. So he would make fun of me. I remember going and getting a headshot for my professional profile, and he said that, you know, it looked like a wedding photo. It was ridiculous. He would make fun of me in public, and he would say things to me like in a business meeting, you know, your new profile photo on LinkedIn looks ridiculous. You look far too made. It's not a wedding. We're not running, you know, this is not a wedding. This is an office environment. Or he would say to me, what's going on with your hair? You know, are you going to some sort of special event or something? It looks silly. Things like that. I don't know if he thought he was being funny at the time, but it really wasn't being funny. Those were public. In private, he would just tear my work apart. He would say things to me like, "You're just not good enough. What's wrong with you? Nothing I ever do is right." He literally would sit there with a red pen and mark all my work like I was at school. There was literally nothing that I could do that this man found any value in whatsoever. Like he would tear everything that I did apart. Even if you went and asked him a question, like he'd roll his eyes at you and sigh, or he'd put his hand up and go, I'm busy, come back later, sort of thing. There were a number of different things. So the fun making was definitely in public, which I think is more powerful for him because it's a way of humiliating you in public. And you can always couch that as a joke to other people. You can always say, oh, he was just joking. He didn't mean anything by it, even though being the person who's bullied, it's incredibly humiliating, especially if it happens again and again.
Yeah, in addition that you have private and public, and for one person, it's an addition of all of that, and it can have many occurrences within a day.
Exactly. There's always these little sarcastic remarks. They're like little digs all the time at you. And it just tears you down. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. It's an English expression. And I definitely understand that because that's what this is like.
What was the type of role and how long were you in this company for?
So I worked as a consultant in this company. I was with them for around about 5 years. So it was a significant period of time. I wasn't a newbie by any stretch of the imagination. And the funny thing is, my clients loved me. It's just that my boss found fault in every single thing that I did.
From day one or in those 5 years, or when did it start?
Look, I found him a difficult personality to work with, and I certainly wasn't the only one. We had a few people leave the company before me. I think essentially he broke them. I think for me, it really started getting worse when I went through a massive personal crisis at home. I had been defrauded out of nearly $100,000, and I literally had a bit of a nervous breakdown, to be frank. So I took some time off work, and then when I went back, instead of being supported, he literally just started climbing into me. And the problem with that, I find in the workplace when you're bullied, is that people don't support you. It's a bit like sharks. If they smell blood in the water, they all come at you.
What were your emotions?
Well, look, just to give you some context, when I came back to the workplace, I was very, very fragile. I needed some security, and the way this made me feel, and this has actually left me with PTSD to this day. I would drive into the office, see his car, and literally burst into tears. I would sneak away to the bathroom and cry. There were times where I was shake. It left me feeling so low and so shattered that I would shake. So it was just, I can't even begin to describe. It's soul destroying. It sucks you of every ounce of life that you have in you. I think a good way to describe it is in Harry Potter, they have this prison, can't remember the name of it, but I will never forget, the prison guards are called Dementors, and they apparently suck the life and the energy out of you. And that was what my boss became like. He literally sucked me out of me. I was a shell of a human being. I was a wreck. I was just gutted. And it left me with, I would say, depression and anxiety as well.
Yes. So hearing from you, the emotion were there, even if it was hard to find maybe words to describe them. And it went into physical distress or physical discomfort, like the shaking, the crying, and having triggers as well, that where if now you go back to the situation, like if you would see the car again, would you feel that you would cry again?
Yes, I think I would. I couldn't even physically be in the same room because I would probably get some sort of a physical reaction to being with him. I mean, you spoke about that physical reaction. My health deteriorated.
Yes.
I looked like I was a mess. I didn't sleep. I kept getting cold sores. My immune system was shot. And it's left me with anxiety. And even now, I will wake up with nightmares. I do wake up with nightmares about him. So I definitely have PTSD. And I guess the other word that I didn't add before was a real sense of terror. I felt a real sense of terror and fear as well.
So no safety at all.
No safety at all. And as I said to you, what happens in that workplace situation when people see someone doing this to you, and I've only been bullied in this one instance, but when it's my boss, everybody actually just ends up climbing into you because they see you as the whipping boy. So it's a very strange psychological phenomenon.
And when it started to kick in, did you search any kind of support?
I didn't have any within the company because it's a smaller business. So there's no HR department, which is in itself a problem. So there's nowhere to turn to. Initially, I just struggled through because at that point you think there's obviously something wrong with me. He's right. But then it got to the point where I can't remember the day that things changed, but I realized that I had to do something. And I turned to a friend of mine who is a coach. And she actually helped me through. She coached me through. She told me what to do. And that was the point as well where she said to me, you've got to put something in writing about this. It's a tricky situation when it's your boss as well, for many reasons. For one reason, they might say, oh, well, he's just disciplining you. And believe me, that's not discipline. That's just torture, basically. It is a form of torture. But after I started working with Liz really helped me. So Liz really helped me. She gave me some perspective. She gave me someone to talk to. She basically held a mirror up to me and said, look, there's nothing wrong with you. This behavior that he's doing is not acceptable, and it shouldn't be like this. And from there, I started doing a little bit of research as well. I didn't want to resign at that point. And I think in some ways that would have meant he would have won, because if I resigned, I would have walked away with nothing. I also didn't obviously want to stretch the whole thing out and end up in court, and I didn't want any of that either. I just wanted him to stop at the end of the day. I did start looking for other work. The problem when you're in that situation is, how can you go into a job interview and present your best confident self when you're a shell of a human being?
It's hard, really hard, because that's right. It's something that puts you so down that it's not overnight that you can be the best version of yourself. It's a process to go back on track. It's like an athlete, when they have an injury, like a physical injury, it's more likely it's taking months and months of recovery to get back to their initial shape. And same here.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, it's been years and years ago that this actually happened. But even now, just talking about this for me is very, very difficult, because I'm starting to feel some of those emotions again, the anxiety. It's like being back with your torturer, basically. And something else that I forgot to mention in terms of how it made me feel, I did try to talk to a couple of my colleagues, and they would defend my boss and say, no, I've never seen him do that to you. Obviously, he did these things to me behind closed doors. But you think you're going insane.
Thank you for sharing. It's really courageous from you. I'm really grateful to have this discussion with you recorded. And definitely at the end of this podcast, we'll talk about happy things. And then, can you share with us what happened next?
Well, my plan was to find another job, but that's a long process. So you're still stuck in this situation, and I was stuck in this situation. I wasn't going to resign, because if I resigned at that point with no job to go to, then you're putting yourself in a worse situation because you've got no income. And as I said, you're a shattered shell of a human being. How can you possibly present yourself anywhere to a job interview and look confident and get the job? So for me, it wasn't an option to resign, and I had to stay in that situation, which was particularly difficult. But what happened, and I was incredibly lucky at this point, is they offered me a retrenchment package.
Could you explain what is a retrenchment package?
So what happened was they reorganized the company, and that made my role no longer, we'd say redundant, but that role no longer exists or is needed within the business. So they paid me out to leave.
Okay, that was a good outcome in my point of view, because you had some time to go into what I call self-care without having any financial worry for the next few months. That's how you are going to get back on track, because first you need to rebuild this person entirely. Then even change, because I do believe that every experience change people in order to move forward.
Rebuild is a very good word. I think you almost have to rebuild yourself brick by brick and find your inner spirit and your confidence, and understand once again that you are a valuable human being, because bullying strips you of everything. It almost leaves you naked and beaten in many ways. So for me, it was brilliant. This was probably the best outcome that I could have hoped for, because you're right, it did give me time to reflect and to grow. But I did ultimately actually need to see a psychologist. And actually, I'd forgotten about that, because this happened to me many years ago. So when you were talking to me about what did I do, actually what I did do when I was being bullied was I eventually went to the doctor, because I just couldn't continue the way I was. And I did start seeing a psychologist, and she tried to give me a few tools. So once I left the business, I then started trying to rebuild who I was. And one of the things I think that you need after being bullied that much is some sort of a win, something that shows you that you are actually a viable, valuable human being. So I started doing some work for myself. I started building another little business that I had at the time. And that gave me some space to actually just heal. And it is healing, actually, because you are damaged and broken. Well, I've been left with permanent post-traumatic stress disorder from that incident, because it was an ongoing incident. It's much easier to recover from PTSD when it's a one-off incident, but because this went on for about 8-9 months, it's left me with a lot of unfortunate emotional baggage to deal with.
And how long can last this healing journey?
So for the most part, I would say I'm over it, but there are things that still trigger it, that do bring it back, that I have to learn to cope with. So that I think will fade with time, hopefully. And it has faded a little bit with time, but it can take years to actually really overcome and feel normal again. And I think for me to feel normal again took me about 6 to 8 months.
Now, from all that happened, would you have done anything differently?
No, I wouldn't have left the job without the financial security, because I'm single, so I don't have anywhere to turn to for help if things go wrong. I wouldn't have done that differently. In fact, I don't think I would have done anything differently. I probably would have gone to see my doctor earlier in the process, and my psychologist earlier in the process. Comes to a point, initially you think there's something wrong with me, and you just deal with it. You know, obviously this person's right, I'm trying to fix it. And then eventually it gets to the point where you just can't cope on your own anymore, and you actually see a psychiatrist or a psychologist about it. I wish I had done that earlier, because I think that would have given me some emotional protection from the situation. It unfortunately made the situation at work even more uncomfortable, but it did protect me to some extent, because I was never alone in a room with him again after that point.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Imagine now you have a person that is going a similar situation that you have been. What would be your advice? What would you say to them?
I would say to them that it's not you. You know, you'll think there's something wrong with me. Obviously, this person's right. It's not you, and you're not going insane. You might not necessarily find support from the people around you in the office, but that's office politics anyway for you. So you need to find somewhere that you can go to find support. So step 1, realize it's not you, it's them. Step 2, get some support. Get some support in terms of your mental health, and get some support in terms of your legal rights as well. Because legally and morally and ethically, this person should not be treating you like this, and it needs to stop. And if you don't stop it, he's going to do it to other people, or she's going to do it to other people as well. So if you work in a bigger company, go and speak to HR. Actually, one step before that, start keeping a journal. Start noting every single time it happens, write down the time, where it happened, and how you felt. So that's very, very important. Then go and approach somebody in HR. HR will be able to help you if you're in a bigger company. The problem you face in a smaller company is if you don't have an HR department, because there's nothing that can protect you from that perspective. So from there, what I would do is I would seek some legal advice. There is workplace health and safety, which the government has in place, or you can actually approach a lawyer about it. I'm not saying you necessarily want to sue the company, but you will need to get some letters written to say that this is happening and that it needs to stop.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm impressed, because my advice as well. Definitely, it's like, first protect yourself, make sure that you have things in writing, search for help and support. So definitely.
I'm just thinking one important about this as well is that there's a difference between a colleague bullying you and your boss bullying you, because it's much easier to just say to your boss, you can turn to your boss when you this issue arises and say, look, I'm not comfortable working with this person. But when it's your boss doing this to you, and it's even worse if he runs the company, because what do you do then? There's nowhere to go. So there are different, obviously, scenarios of being bullied, and the most difficult is when it's your boss and there's no boss above him.
Yes. I had another interview with someone, and that was exactly this situation. That was a small company, and he was reporting to the boss directly, no HR department. So he pushed a lot on himself and sticking to this situation, and as well for financial reason, not willing to quit. He pushed that much that at the end of the day, he couldn't even walk towards the office. The damage was that he had to stay for 3 months at home.
Absolutely. It's like your body knows that it's going to be damaged when it goes there. And that's, I think, also why I would sit in the car park and cry in the mornings, because I just knew what was in store for me for that day. And I think there is probably a bit of a danger in smaller companies like this, because there's just nowhere to turn to, and particularly if it's a boss that's doing it to you. And there's more risk of being trapped in that situation for people. But there are places to go to. Speak to health and safety or workers' comp. They're not that useful, because obviously they can't sort of take sides, and they're not going to give you any information that they feel could potentially be seen as taking sides. But the next best thing is to find a lawyer who specializes in this and get some advice from them. And at the bare minimum, get them to write a letter. But the best thing you can do, if you feel this is happening to you, buy yourself a book, a cheap journal from the supermarket if need be, and start writing it down. Document every single incident.
That was Pat, an amazing and courageous lady. Thank you for sharing. And I hope that it gave you perspective to shift your thinking in the workplace. Thank you.